Thanks for tuning in for this special edition of Forage Focus, your favorite show that's all about forages. On today's show, we're going to be discussing some ongoing research at the Eastern Agricultural Research Station with my special guest, Brady Campbell. Stay tuned. So my guest today on the show is Brady Campbell, and Brady is a PhD student in the Department of Animal Sciences. Brady, thanks for joining me. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and why we're out here at the research farm today?
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Christine. As Christine said, I'm Brady Campbell. I'm the program coordinator of the OSU Sheep Team within the Department of Animal Sciences. I'm also a PhD student working with Dr. Tony Parker, and we're focusing on the sustainability of grass-fed lamb in the eastern United States. And today we're actually out here at the Eastern Research Station, and we're working lambs today, Christine. We've got a research project currently going on right now. We're grazing annual forages. We've got 3 different treatments, and we'll go through a bit of this with our viewers today.
Okay. Brady, before we dive into today's topic, let's share with our viewers some information about the OSU Sheep Team. So the Sheep Team is a combined effort of the Department of Animal Sciences and OSU Extension. We have members from both the department and Extension working to put together programs and helpful information for the sheep producers of Ohio.
Certainly, and for our viewers out there, you can certainly find our webpage at sheep.osu.edu. That information will be at the end of the clip here. But our webpage really focuses on providing our producers and anyone involved in the small ruminant and also our large ruminant industries with very timely and accurate information regarding anything from animal management to forages, if you would, also from a health aspect and anything in between. So our viewers have an array of items that they can find. One of the biggest highlights that our webpage features is that what I've done here recently, Christine, through my time as program coordinator, is I've taken some of the OSU research that's happened here at the university over the past 20 years, and actually regarding sheep research, we've done over 100 projects. And one of my goals is to go through, take that information from those scientific manuscripts, break them down into some bite-sized pieces, and provide that information that's important to our producers.
Brady, tell us a bit about the research project that you have going on here in Caldwell.
Yeah, so the basis of our research project here is using fall-born lambs. We're putting them into a fall and winter grazing type system to appease the market of grass-fed lamb. Each group consists of 6 lambs, and we've got 9 different paddocks. And in each of our paddocks, we've got 3 different types of forages. Our first being our brassicas, or our turnips, as you can see here in front of us. We're also grazing on stockpile pasture as well as oats.
For someone who's never grown brassicas before, the idea of utilizing turnips or radishes can be a little bit intimidating, but they're actually quite easy to establish and maintain. And as far as getting started with this, you don't need a lot of equipment. The plots that you see here were prepared just by an application of a broad spectrum herbicide, and then we no-till drilled the seed directly into the plots. We applied no fertilizer. There's no fungicides or pesticides applied to these. And what we got was a really nice uniform stand of turnips. We did attempt to seed rye in the plots, but we had about 2 months of drought, and the rye did not come through, but the turnips still did great.
And Christine, we planted these end of August.
Yeah, we did.
And here we are, December. We're still grazing on these brassicas or these turnips themselves. Another note on these brassicas here, as you can see, it's just your common purple top type of brassica, or your turnip there. Can be easily picked up at the hardware store, at the feed mill, or any of your local retailers. And you know, a lot of people are saying, you know, we need to go through, we need to buy those varieties that are forage type, and that's a good point. You can get a bit more bang for your buck there, but these generic purple type turnips will do you just fine to get you through your winter feeding system.
Forage quality is just one of the research questions in your project, Brady. The other one has to do with parasites.
Definitely. Parasite management. Parasites being the biggest issue in any of our ruminant species, really, when we're talking about forage-based operations. The reasons why we chose some of these forages: one, they're easy to plant, easy to establish. We've already talked about the nutritive qualities of these plants, which make them really good from converting the plant to feed. But the other part is thinking about the botanical structure of some of these forages. And if we take a look at this, you can see we no-till seed these. Our ground was a bit drier, and that's quite all right. You can see we've got a really nice stand here. But with that dry ground, you can see some of our turnips actually grew upward rather than downward. But that's perfectly fine from the standpoint of parasites. Parasites, because we did kill all of this down, if we had any residual populations of parasites in this field, they'd be down on our soil or our ground level layer down here. The way that parasites travel up and down the forage leaflet is actually through our dew droplets. With this large bulb at the bottom of the plant, it's pretty difficult for those larvae to actually migrate up and around that bulb. It's also pretty slick, the bulb itself, as well as the leaflet or the stem on these turnips as well. So from a parasite management standpoint, we're grazing in the fall. Theoretically, we should have some cooler temperatures that are going to reduce the pressure of parasites. We're trying to use different forages here. In other cases, we could have tilled up this ground, making it, turning the ground over, which would have created an anaerobic environment. In doing so, we're actually kind of smothering some of those parasites out, putting those eggs beneath the ground. So there's several different ways that we can get around parasites, but you know, the reality of it, Christine, is that we're going to have to find ways to live with parasites. I don't see any solutions in the near future where we're going to be able to entirely eliminate parasites.
Yeah, that's probably true, Brady. And when we talk about sheep production, our station manager here at the farm, Wayne, he likes to talk about the 3 Ps: parasites, predators, and people. And we, being one of those factors, need to do as much as we can to learn about the system and how we can create the best environment possible for our grazing animals. So we're never going to fully get rid of predators. We're never going to get rid of parasites. How can we as people influence that system for the greater good?
Definitely.
Hopefully we'll find out with your project.
For sure. Our second forage species type that we're going to be utilizing in our grazing trial is our stockpile pasture. As you can see here, this pasture is primarily tall fescue. There are some legumes, a lot of white clover amongst the pasture and patches here and there, but primarily we see a lot of our tall fescue. Now you may be thinking, how are you grazing growing lambs on tall fescue? Especially with some of the issues you may see with the fescue toxicity. After frost, fescue is actually a really palatable feedstuffs, and also the process of making hay, as well as the frost coming through, actually decrease the levels of toxicity issues within the plant itself. Research has shown that the most toxic portions of tall fescue is one, going to be in the seed head, and as you can see, these pastures aren't out into seed, and the other portion that has the most or the highest levels of endophyte or toxicity is going to be the bottom 3 inches. Again, with our grazing strategies that we've been implementing here with this grazing project, we don't intend those lambs to be grazing. Therefore, we expect to see very little impact associated with the ergovaline within these forage plants. Before we head inside, I wanted to take a look at one last paddock that we have here that we're grazing with our sheep. As you can see, we're standing amongst a field of oats. A lot of people get concerned this time of year. As you know, sometimes people are using oats as a cover crop or a companion crop. They're putting these oats out here because they do germinate really quickly. They provide a nice canopy for those growing forages. Unfortunately, we know that oats winter kill, and as you can see, these oats have gone through that process with the snow and the frost that we have experienced down here at the research station. But don't let this color of the oats fool you. They may be brown, but our nutrient analysis show that these forages actually retain their sugars and their proteins up in the leaf itself. So again, these forages, just like our brassicas, high protein, high TDM values, are really nutritious forage for these lambs to be grazing on.
We finished up outside with our field work for today, so now we're back inside to take a look at some more specifics of the project that we're working on. So first off, we want to talk about why fall grazing is something most producers should at least consider, right? There's a lot of benefits to it that we've talked about already outside, and those include that we can still utilize high quality forages. We can use those forages to fit the market of grass-fed, and we can also decrease our need for stored feeds. And something we didn't really mention outside is that a lot of those cool season annuals can also be cover crops. So if you're utilizing cover crops, you can get double benefits from them if you choose to graze them as well.
Right, right. And the other thing that we want to kind of touch base on, Christine, is what a lot of my research revolves around, and that's again is parasite management, right? Aside from the benefits that cover crops and annual forages are able to provide to us, Christine, one thing that I want to really hone in on with my research are the benefits from parasite management standpoint. There's a lot of different things that we can discuss. We discussed a few of them out in the field, but to kind of reiterate some of the discussions we had outside, first and foremost is that we're going to be disrupting the parasite life cycle. If we're talking about strongel type worms, or the barber pole worm, Homunculus contortus, the most common parasite or blood-sucking parasitism that affects most of our grazing livestock, at least that's what we are more concerned with our research. With that, the basic life cycle of that parasite in ideal conditions, so very hot, humid, wet type of conditions, actually when that egg from Homunculus is laid into the manure, it can take as short as 4 days to go from egg to hatch to an effective larvae and then be consumed by our grazing livestock. But in these types of situations, again, we were in a cooler type of environment, those instances may be delayed. So how can we disrupt that parasite life cycle from hatching to getting into our animals? Well, again, we talked about the plant structure of those forages, how it may not be as inducive for the parasitical larvae to be traveling up and down the forage leaflet of those selected forages that we were utilizing. Again, temperature playing a big role, and this is really a nice alternative management strategy that we can use. It's a nice tool to have in our toolbox as we think about how to manage parasites on farm.
Brady, you have supplied a really nice figure that talks some about the temperatures that parasites thrive in, and also what allows them to survive. So a lot of people think that once we get freezing temperatures, like, we're going to be safe. But that's not true, is it?
Certainly not the case. So if you kind of direct yourself to the image that we've got popped up on the slide here, it's from Nelson and colleagues from 2007, and it's a really nice picture. The image that you see there is the actual water droplet on that forage leaflet, and if you can look ever so closely, you can actually see those infective larvae actually amongst that water droplet. Again, they're going to use that forage leaflet to travel up and down. But I really like the thermometer that we've got off to the side, and we've got a range from 0 degrees C, or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, all the way up to above 104 degrees Fahrenheit. As we kind of discussed out on pasture, we've had a fluctuation in temperature, Christine, and as you can see, even with our lows that we've been experiencing in 30-degree weather, we're going to see an immense decrease in the actual survivability and hatchability of these parasites. But again, we've had days where it's been 40, 50, 60 degrees. It's really going to jumpstart those parasites to start hatching out of those eggs and potentially be lethal to these animals if we allow it to continue on.
We mentioned some forage quality terms while we were in the field that some people might not be familiar with. We should probably cover those before we look deeper at the nutritional value of those forages. One of them that we talk about a lot is TDN, which is total digestible nutrients. And that's actually based on an equation. What are the things we take into account in that equation?
Right, with the small ruminant NRC, and that's the book that we're going to be commonly using to be discussing and describing diets and nutritional needs for our small ruminant animals, whether that be sheep, goats, cervids, which is going to be our deer and our elk, as well as our New World camelids, which is going to be our alpacas and llamas. With our total digestible nutrients, that's going to describe the digestible carbohydrates, digestible crude protein, and then also a digestible crude fat. Taking all of those factors into one is going to equal our TDN value.
Another one that we should talk about is acid detergent fiber, which is ADF.
Right.
This one can be a little bit hard to understand if you're not in a plant science background, but what ADF really is the indigestible portion of the forage, and that can be made up of both cellulose and lignin. When we talk about lignin, it's the one that cannot be broken down in the rumen. It is indigestible. There are some organisms in nature that digest lignin, but it's not our grazing livestock. And then there's cellulose. And cellulose is resistant to breakdown. Some of it does get broken down, but not all of it. So the ADF portion of whatever forage sample we've analyzed is the part that is not digestible. There's another one similar to that, and that's NDF.
Right, and our NDF value means our neutral detergent fiber. It takes into account both of the structures that Christine just previously mentioned, both lignin and cellulose, but it also has another component, and that's going to be hemicellulose. Hemicellulose is the structural carbohydrates that are less complex in their makeup and their bonds, and our ruminants are actually able to easily, or not easily, but more readily be able to digest those forage products. In my opinion, this is a really important piece of the puzzle when we start talking about nutrient analysis, getting your hay tested. And Christine and I thought it was really important to go through and kind of talk about these three big factors: TDN, ADF, and NDF.
The sample that you're seeing on the screen is an example of first cutting hay that was made at the end of June. And from what you know watching previous episodes of Forage Focus, that's definitely later than what we'd consider ideal. So we're definitely going to see some higher levels of things like lignin because those plants are over mature.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at this sample, Brady, what are some things you see on here that definitely need to be addressed when we go through this sample with a producer?
Right. A lot of our equations that we use, Christine, is going to be based upon dry matter intake. And the one thing that we need to note here is, yes, we went through and we baled dry hay, but we still need to note that this bale of hay here is still over 10% moisture. So this is as an as-fed or as-sampled product here. So we need to take that into account. So when we're formulating diets or estimating intake, we need to account for that moisture factor that's in there. Another important factor we need to take a look at here is crude protein. As Christine has mentioned, it's pretty low, about 6%. Whether that's able to sustain, for example, a non-lactating or lactating ewe is questionable, right? But we need to go back to the drawing board first and foremost to make sure that there's enough energy available in that diet as well. We've already talked about the importance of ADF and NDF, and those are also labeled on this figure here too, as well.
The big thing that concerns me when we look at this, one of the first things I look at when I do sample analysis with producers is TDN. And our TDN on a dry matter basis here is 38%. If only 38% of what you're feeding is actually digestible, we are going to run into some problems. Those animals are going to start to develop what we call hay belly, where they're full, but they're not actually getting much nutrition. So if we build off of that example and look at another sample, what we've got here is for brassicas, right?
These are brassicas, yeah, these are standing forages. Again, this is an example from my previous research, some forage samples from 2017. Still valid, Christine. Here in this example, we've got brassicas in this example. These brassica samples, what we call quality samples, we're sending them off to a lab. We're going through a field, we're mimicking a sheep actually grazing in the field, so we're getting a lot of that nice leaflet that's available in that forage. We're going to send that in for a nutrient analysis. And you can see here this was collected in the middle of November 2017. Take a look at that crude protein value, 23%. And let's cruise down here to the NDF or the TDN value. We can see it's almost 73%. 73% of that diet is digestible by that animal itself, Christine. That's a pretty good value.
Significantly better than what we saw with that typical hay sample.
Right. So this here is just two visuals that we can take a look at. One of them is going to be a stored hay product that we have, and we're intending to feed it during some of the worst parts of our winter. Or we can have this standing forage that we took a little extra time to take care of and put out in the field.
Something people might ask when they're listening to us talk about this is, well, yeah, they look good at the beginning of fall, but as you progress later into the season, are they still as good? Well, the slide that you provided for us to look at next shows that they really do retain quite a bit of value.
They do, and here again, Christine, as you said, the examples, these are the first and the last collection date during that 2017 grazing study. We can see here we only lost 3 percentage points in overall protein. That's still pretty good, 20% protein. I don't know of many forages that are really standing out in the field middle of December and be able to have that kind of protein within them. Take a look at our TDN value that we like to talk about here. Only a difference of 2.5%. Still in that upper 70s, a really nice TDN value. Taking a look at that NDF or that gut fill or that bulk density of that diet, actually increased ever so slightly, up to that 30%. So that's probably our biggest factor in this scenario that we need to be concerned about is that NDF. Again, thinking about what to do with some of that poor quality hay, stop that passage rate ever so slightly, help that animal utilize that feed a bit better.
Yeah, Now let's look at an example that's for oats, another forage that's in your study.
Yeah, for sure. Oats here tell just a slightly different story, Christine, when we take a look at it, comparing it back to our brassicas. If we take a look at crude protein, our oats were actually the highest protein within our system in 2017 when they were first placed out on pasture, 25%. In my opinion, it's a little too hot. What are we going to do with that excess nitrogen as we're grazing those lambs through there? As we sample it in mid-December, we can see that that crude protein has dropped significantly down to 17.5%. Moving on to NDF, we've got some really good NDF values here, Christine. I don't think that those NDF values are out of our specs. What's the typical NDF value that we're looking for as a rule of thumb in general with forages?
What I really like to see is somewhere between 40 and 60%, and I call that okay. It really, though, like we talked about before, depends on that ADF value as well. So if we go strictly off of NDF, we're missing out on that part that's actually not digestible. So that's what I typically like to see is somewhere between 40 and 60% when we're looking at samples.
We've definitely checked the box here with these oats, haven't we, Christine?
Yeah, we have, even into December.
Into December, exactly. The thing that concerns me here with our oats is that we have a really nice TDN value, very comparable to our brassicas at the beginning of November of 2017. But as we transition to the middle of December, we can see that our TDN value has dropped significantly down to almost 60%. So quite the drop overall.
Yeah, but still in a lot better shape than what we have with that poor quality hay.
For sure.
And the last species that you're looking at in your study is fescue. And we should note that this is stockpiled fescue, so there are other things growing in the pasture at the same time, but the primary thing that they're grazing is the fescue. This is a practice that most farmers across Ohio could implement. Almost everybody still has tall fescue. And there's some challenges with trying to utilize that, especially during midsummer. But once we get into fall and even into winter, it can become a really palatable and a good quality forage as well.
Definitely. Kind of taking a look at the slide here, look at that. Crude protein 14.5%, mid-December down to 11%. We're still a lot better than that fescue hay you guys made there in June.
Absolutely. Look at that TDN value, we're good. NDF, we're still good. This is way better than what you're going to see midsummer if you're trying to harvest this as hay. Like I mentioned before, this takes less work.
Right.
It costs a lot less money.
Right.
All you need is a little fence so that you can move the animals around.
Definitely. And, Christine, you don't have to be stockpiling this in a pasture. Why not take your cutting of hay early enough, allow that pasture, that hay field itself, stockpile itself, utilize some electric fence and kind of mow through that with your livestock during the winter. You have some really nice regrowth, and plus you've already fertilized your hay field for the next coming year.
Absolutely. It's a win all around. So now let's take a look at all three of these compared next to each other. We've talked about them each individually, but if you put them on a level playing field and look at them side by side, our brassicas hold that value for a longer period of time than the others do. And we should certainly meet the needs of most of our grazing livestock in all of these systems. When we talk about actual energy demands by our animals, you've provided some examples to look at for what we actually need for animals to maintain body condition.
Right, so what we did, Christine, is I went to the small ruminant NRC and I took a look at the values for different production stages of our livestock. Here we're going to be talking about a ewe, and this ewe is going to be an average weight of 154 pounds. I think that's pretty representative of our commercial flocks, especially here in the eastern United States. So taking a look at this table here, the first and foremost, we want to take a look at estimated intake, and that's going to be provided in pounds needed per day by that animal. Each of these animals require, on a percentage body weight basis, X amount of feed themselves, right? So through the calculations, through the NRC, we can see that a 154-pound ewe at maintenance requires about 2.5 pounds of feed, dry matter basis, on a daily basis. The NRC also provides us with a TDN value. Again, that TDN value can be obtained from your feed sample that you take and have submitted. So again, that's where we really stress the importance of getting your feedstuffs analyzed to have a good understanding of what these values are. Again, using that same 154-pound ewe, at maintenance, she's going to require 1.36 pounds per day from a TDN standpoint. Now, Christine, I went through and I did the liberty of calculating these using the percentages from those values that I had provided earlier, and you can see from a brassica, oat, and stockpile pasture, we can see that those TDN values are well above what is required by that animal.
That they are. And that makes us happy to see because it means we're on the right track research-wise. If we take a look now as we move into early gestation, is it still the same story?
Still the same story. Again, taking a look here, the same 154-pound ewe. I've just broke it down to early gestation, and I've also broken it down into how many fetuses this female is supporting. The first line is going to be singles, followed by twins, followed by triplets. Again, in that first column, you'll see the estimated intake. Again, still calculated in the same regard. We've got anywhere from about a little over 3 pounds up to 4 pounds needed per head per day, based upon how many lambs those ewes are supporting. I've got the required TDN value provided there as well, and then taking a look at our brassicas, oats, and stockpile pasture, you can see the numbers provided there as well.
And again, we're meeting our goals. As we look at late gestation, obviously nutritional needs go up.
Right. And late gestation, we describe that as the last trimester or the last 50 days of gestation, especially for our ewes, right? And about 70% of fetal growth is going to occur during this time period. So it's really essential that we are able to provide these ewes with optimal nutrition during this time period. In our first table, labeled Table 8, we can see from the standpoint of all these production stages, if our animals in maintenance, early gestation, or late gestation, we're grazing on these forages at the beginning of November, we can see that all of our TDN values are listed in green, Christine, and that means we're in the good. That means we are providing enough nutrition, utilizing, in that situation, those forages, we're meeting the demands of those animals.
Yeah, we want to see green. And as we proceed on to the next chart, which shows us later in the season.
Right. And these are going to be collected at mid-December, right?
Right.
We're hurting. As you can see, there's a few values that are listed in red here. You can see that we do really well for maintenance. Even early gestation in the middle of December, those forages are still getting the job done. But as we transition into late gestation, you can see that for twin-bearing ewes and triplet-bearing ewes, we can see that oats and stockpile pasture just don't have enough energy in them from the standpoint of what those ewes require from a energy intake standpoint.
Right, and we're close, but we still need to plan on providing some supplemental feed. So as we wrap up today, we want to summarize that we think cool season annuals can be a great way to make up for poor quality hay, utilize the land that you already have. If you're a crop farmer and you're utilizing cover crops, don't let it just stop there. Those could have an alternative use for livestock as well. And don't let your animals go hungry this winter. Get your forages analyzed so that you can develop a nutritional program to meet their needs all through the year. Brady, if people have additional questions for you or we've provided the contact information to reach us. We'd love to hear from you if you have ideas of future things we can do for the sheep team, or if you have questions about today's episode, feel free to get a hold of us. Thank you for watching this edition of Forage Focus. And Brady, thank you for joining us on the show. It's been a pleasure. We'll catch you next time for another edition of Forage Focus. High five.